Hello, everyone. I'm Daisy Auger-Dominguez, and I'm the Chief People Officer at Vice Media Group. It's such a pleasure to be here with a woman I deeply admire and who I'm thrilled to call a colleague, Paola Ramos, daughter of Jorge Ramos and Gina Montaner, host and correspondent at Vice and Vice News, and author of Finding Latinx, In Search of the Voices Redefining Latino Identity, which is out in just 5 days on October 20th. Today, we're going to speak for about 20 minutes on a topic that is deeply personal to me and to Paola, the topic of the Latinx identity. I have spent a lifetime navigating cultural and racial identity as a Dominican, Puerto Rican, New Yorker, and after 2 decades designing and executing diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies for companies like Moody's Investor Service, the Walt Disney Company, and Google, and now Vice Media, I know that it takes real courage to dismantle inequities in the workplace and to speak your truth the way that Paola does. I first met Paola over a year ago at a supermajority event focused on women's activism and was instantly drawn to how passionately she shared her story and the work she's been leading to remind everyone, especially those from underrepresented and marginalized communities, that their voices matter. I remember thinking, we need more people like Paola. I became one of her proud champions from that day on, and she was one of the first people I told that I would be joining Vice Media earlier this year. Thank you for being with us today, Paola.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the coolest opportunity to be interviewed by you. I have to say that.
Gracias. Well, let's start at the beginning. You have been advocating for the Latinx community for a long time. Can you start by telling us a bit about the journey that's led you to where you are today?
Yes. My journey, I think, starts probably where your journey starts and where most people's journey starts. It starts with my parents, no? The immigrant story, my dad, obviously he's a Mexican journalist, but he left Mexico because he was censored, right? So the United States offered freedom of expression. My mom is Cuban. She had to leave the island because of oppression, because of political oppression. And so I grew up, as you can imagine, in an environment where we talked about politics all day long. No, politics was at the core of it. But my dad taught me, I learned 2 things from my parents that I think have really developed my growth, no? From my dad, I learned that no matter where you are, you always question those in power, no? Always. From my mom, I learned that no matter where you are, you always try and uplift and look at the dignity of people. And so those are sort of like the 2 principles that I think formed me, watching 2 people that are both journalists, that are both talking about politics. And then I think of my journey as it was never truly a straight shot, no? It's always been kind of like a ping pong between politics and storytelling, because I view those things as sort of like a balance of power, no? And that balance changes depending obviously on what's happening. At one point I thought that power was in DC, in the Obama administration, because that is where change, I believe, was. At some point I thought that it was in presidential campaigns, because that was a moment where I believe that's how change grows. Now I believe that power is outside of politics, right? It's in storytelling, it's in media, it's in journalism, because that's where I think is the most powerful tool that we have. And so I think of it as this sort of like ping pong, but always between these 2 worlds.
And it does exist across these multiple worlds. Yeah. I think what the way that your father raised you is how mine raised me. Mm-hmm. I always call it, I just have a healthy distrust of authority.
Yes. Yeah. And that's why he gets kicked out of every room he's in. Right?
and we love him for doing so.
Yeah, but that shapes you, those moments shape you. And yeah, I think that's been instrumental in helping me develop that voice.
That's really powerful. Well, let's dive into your voice. Let's dive right into your upcoming book, Finding Latinx, In Search of the Voices Redefining Latino Identity. You've called this work a coming out book for all of the different identities within our comunidad. Mm-hmm. Can you share what drove you to write this book and why it's so important?
Yeah. First of all, I can't believe that it's almost out there. It's been the craziest journey, but it's finally out there almost. But the idea started almost 4 years ago, right? So 4 years ago, I'm working in the Hillary campaign. It's election day, right? And I believed that the headline of the election in 2016 was going to be that Latinos beat Donald Trump. No, that to me was going to be the headline, just because, Donald Trump for many, you can agree with him or not. No, you can be a Republican or not, but for many, you know, he was seen as an existential threat to the Latino community. And so I believe that was going to be the headline. It turns out that night, less than 50% of Latino eligible voters actually turned out to vote. And so in that moment, I had this realization that we truly didn't understand, I myself included, didn't really understand who Latino people were anymore. You know, how we were changing, how our identities were hidden, the sort of subcultures that were there. I hadn't even looked at myself and understood how in the past 10 years, I had gone, you know, from being just a Latina to a woman Latina that is queer. You know, I looked to my right and my girlfriend who's Black, but she also identified as a Latina, but I only saw her as Black because she herself didn't feel comfortable claiming her Latinidad. I looked at my brother, you know, my brother who's an American football player, but our dad is a Mexican immigrant and he barely speaks Spanish, right? I looked at my abuela and she comes from a conservative Cuban background, yet she was deviating these sort of like traditional norms on her own. And that's what prompted me to say, you know what, like I need to understand what is happening across the country and dig deeper from this like image that we've all, you know, been entrenched within our minds. And that to me is the meaning of Latinx, right? It's nothing but, it forces you to see beyond, no? To me, it's like, if you look at our community through that lens, then you start to understand things that we didn't really see, no? You start to see that there are 3 million Afro-Latinos in this country. You start to understand that there are 250,000 Latinos who are also Muslim. You start to understand that there's over 1 million Latinos that identify as Indigenous folks. You start to understand that immigrants are not just brown, right? They're also Black immigrants in this country, that we don't just navigate the immigration system, but also the criminal justice system. That if you're a Latino man, 1 out of 7 Latino men will be in the criminal justice system and will have some form of interaction with that system at some point in their lives. And so that's what prompted me to write this book, and to know what I didn't know.
Oh, that's so powerful. And I want to go, I want to delve into all of it, but I want everybody to read your book. So I'll go into every detail. But your book calls on all of us to expand our understanding of what it means to be a Latino and what it means to be American. So I'm curious, what does it mean to you to be Latino and American?
The way that I see it now is that, and they don't want us to believe this, but there is nothing more American than to be Latino. Like the American story is the Latino story, right? And if you think about it that way, I feel like what we've known so far, and what mainstream media has taught us and what books teach us is the immigrant story, right? It's the story of our parents and our parents' generation, where like our parents and the older generation came to this country. Again, we can all disagree on many things. We can all have different identities, but this is the one thread that we all have. The older generation came to this country for better rights, for better freedoms, and for equality. And so the next part of that story is what I'm seeing now. No, that's the shifting part of the story, which is, what did the younger generations do with the rights that our parents and our grandparents fought for? No, what have I done with the freedoms that my ancestors have paid for me? No, and that's where Latinx comes in. Because that's the story that we don't know. That's the story that like Latino can't really capture because it's limited. That's the story that American can't really capture because our history and our system has limited. And that's where Latinx comes in, because to me, Latinx is rooted in an identity that simply looks out for freedom. No? And so that's the hybrid between Latino and American to me.
Oh, I love that. And I've never seen it positioned that way. I'm
learning as I go, no? And honestly, and I had this realization, because there is, and we can talk about that later, there is a lot of controversy about Latinx. Now, a lot of people are like, no, esta palabra no, por favor. But to me, that's it, right? Like, why it's nothing more than us understanding what we've done with what our older people have fought for. No, to be able to say that I am whomever I want, no, that these are my rights, that I can dress and I can be whomever I want, no, that is Latinx.
I love that. And in your book, you chronicle how the term Latinx, which you're sort of on the surface of it, can be quite divisive, but you chronicle it as having given rise to a sense of collectivity and solidarity among Latinos that's unseen in this country for decades. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so you say divisive. No, so it's right. Like, I don't want people to think like, oh, wow, like Latinx is a super popular term, because it's not, but I wanted to get there, right? The truth is that I believe it's like only 3% of people identify as Latinx. And I think it's like over 30% of Latinos have heard of the term, right? And the way that I see it is because, first of all, people don't really know what it means, which is the beauty of the term, that we for the first time can get to define it. And what I also think that means is that, you know, you are a reflection of how you see yourself in the world, no? And we've been limited so much by language. And so Latinx forces you to see things differently. And so when I see that, when I say Latinx and I tell you the definition, I see things differently, no? The solidarity that I see is this summer, you know, after George Floyd was brutally murdered, all of a sudden you see countless Latinos on the street with pancartas that say, tu lucha es mi lucha, no? And they're talking directly to Afro-Latinos. That's solidarity. That's looking our community through a Latinx lens. When I was traveling across the country to write this book, during the Kavanaugh hearings, I'll never forget, in Arizona, I stopped by at a community health center, and outside in the parking lot, I see young Latinas that are talking to me, and instead of them simply having a conversation with myself, they're inviting their moms and their abuelas to tell me and to force their mothers to talk about what it means to be abused and harassment, and to talk about stereotypes and things that sometimes our culture has a hard time talking about. That to me is solidarity. It's you know, being in the deep South, and I was in Georgia. I spent a lot of time in Georgia and embedding with the indigenous Mayan community, for the first time, that younger generation of Mayans isn't scared to speak in their indigenous language. No, they're not scared, because that to them is pride. No, that to them is what it means to be American. No, that's solidarity, and countless stories like that. Yeah.
I think that's beautiful, Paola. You know, my daughter's 12, and I can't wait for her to read this book. And she corrects me all the time when I say Latino. She reminds me always, Mommy, it's Latinx.
That's interesting. Yeah. And when I think about the younger Latino generation, the younger Latinx generation, the countless youth that I've met that are outspoken about mental health, right? Which is, again, another crisis that our community goes through, that young Latinos in this country are facing a mental health crisis, no? Anxiety, depression. Now, our rates are higher than many folks. They're speaking out, and they're choosing to say words out loud in a way that our parents didn't. No, that also is solidarity. And so there's so much to learn from them.
Oh, and that's that true sense of identity. And I think that what gets me excited is that, to your point about the migratory patterns for our community, yes, we came here for freedom, for economic security, for support. But, you know, in those early days, in those decades, there wasn't, freedom didn't mean that we could claim who we were. Exactly. Freedom didn't mean that we could say who we are in a way that, you know, in the way that we've earned it thanks to our, you know, our parents and our grandparents.
That's right.
And it's so beautiful for you to be telling that story.
No, and you know, and I've learned that also from other folks, like, for instance, like Monica Ramirez, no? Like an amazing activist, and she's the daughter of farm workers. And I'll never forget what she told me. She said, you know, my mom's generation, her mom's a farm worker, her family is a family of farm workers who had to assimilate in this country. They had no one to fall back on, you know? And so the difference now with us, with people like Monica, is that we have people to fall back on, no? We got our backs, and I think that's a big difference, no?
Oh, I love that. And I so love that you're writing and doing the work you're doing, Paola, really.
No, thank you.
Well, let's change course a bit here. The stakes are high in this election. You talked about the last election. They're even higher now, and it's only about 3 weeks away. You've previously stated that this upcoming presidential election, you consider it to be the most important one in your lifetime. Mm-hmm. How do you see young Latinx being the generation of change this November? How can we mobilize the country's second largest voting bloc? I'm going to say that again, second largest voting bloc, to better realize that it's time to amplify our collective voice?
Yeah, I mean, I know young Latinos are going to vote. No, we are going to vote. And I think it's very simple. I think because this election, it is the most important one, because it truly is a matter of life and death for our people. Like it is that simple. And young Latinos have been seeing that left and right in their own communities, in their own households. No, almost 37,000 Latinos have died of COVID-19. 37,000, right? I'm talking to you from Texas right now. I've talked to countless young people that have lost their moms and their dads and their grandparents, and that stays with you, you know? So there used to be a time perhaps where like politics didn't feel personal for us. Politics is personal right now for everybody, every Latino. You can be a Republican or a Democrat. Politics is personal. We're losing our people. The unemployment rate for Latinos in this country is out of the roof, more so than any other demographic. And it's hard to survive. And so that's why it's the most important election, because it is a matter of life and death, and because we're seeing it around us. And so I do believe, and we know that young Latinos will get out. And I think it is our responsibility to simply continue to inform people about how to do that in the safest, right, and the best way that we can. No? So I think our roles is just simply informar. No, here are the deadlines in your state. Here's the last time you can register to vote. Here's how to request your mail-in ballot. If you can vote in a safe manner, here's how you do it. And so obviously this network is full of incredibly powerful people with huge networks. I think it's nothing but our responsibility to simply provide those informational tools, particularly in an era where disinformation is specifically targeting Latinos. Why? Because we live on our phones. No, we Latinos, we're on our phones more than anyone, and people know that. And so we have to battle that disinformation with information.
I love that. Battling disinformation, everyone. You've heard it here from Paola. Well, let's talk to this community. I want to congratulate you on being recognized as one of the Alumni Society's class of 2020 honorees. Well deserved.
Very proud. No.
This year's theme calls on visible leaders to show up. What does visible leadership mean to you?
Visible right now for me means giving visibility to those that don't have it, right? So in this role, no, and with this honor, and what visible leadership means to me is using the immense privilege that I have right now, that this light skin color has granted me, and that our incredible platforms at Vice give us, and other platforms that I have the privilege of moving around. Like it is using that influence to continue to uplift voices and bring in voices to do this work with me. And so that's how I interpret visible leadership, you know?
I love that. Paola, as we wrap up, I want to end with a call to action. Today's event is meant to move Alumni Society members and partners to take action and create change. Change in leadership, in policy, in diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, and other areas. What is your call to action for each and every one of us?
I actually have to say to follow the youth. Like you're just talking about your daughter. Like I am learning so much about the younger Latino generation, and I think they have something figured out. There is this like courage that they have, and this way that they look at the world, where like they will not stand injustices in a way that like perhaps we did, no? And I think there's a lot to learn from them. No, I think there's a lot to learn from how they are interpreting the country right now, how they're moving forward right now, how they're not looking for answers the way that we were, not settling for things the way that perhaps you and I have. And so I think in those networks, no, if look at the youth and see what they're doing. And I think that has been a big lesson learned for me, to understand the patterns that they're creating. So listen to young people and seek them out.
Let's listen to them. They will save us. I say this.
I think so, honestly.
I say this, and I say this with all the hope and admiration in my heart.
Yeah, no, me too. I hope so. Yes.
I love this. Gracias, Paola, for this wonderful conversation. Everyone, there you have it. Paola Ramos wants everyone within the Latinx community to know they have a voice. So let's all spread the word and do our part to ensure that they do. I'm going to turn it back now to the Alumni Society. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you.
Thank you.